Good morning. Please, everybody, have seats. We're going to start 10 minutes late, so we will make up for the time. Thank you. Again, my name is Jaime Granados. I have been asked to moderate this session. First of all, I want to thank, again, UNCTAD, also the government of Barbados, and very especially my colleague here, Krista Lucenti, who helped me in organizing this panel. It is going to be about food security and trade policy, the intersection among trade policies and how it can help us tackle risks associated to food insecurity. To address these issues, we have three very distinguished panelists. To my left, we have Anton Edmonds. He is the General Manager of the Caribbean region at the Inter-American Development Bank. To my right, we have Edna Ramirez. She's the Dean of Legal Studies of the University of Guadalajara in Mexico. And further to my right, we have Robles Abri. He's an economist at FAO Investment Center in Rome. So we have a variety here of points of view which will make this session even more interesting. Now, regarding food insecurity and the global risks of food insecurity and how can trade policy help mitigate these different risks. We are very seriously engaged in analyzing what's going to be the problem of food insecurity over the mid and long term. When I say we are the IDB. In fact, we are kind of modeling the different scenarios that we will face in 2040, because we foresee that there will be, enabling factors that will help us generate more, for instance, exports and food. And on the other hand, we also see some disrupting factors as well. Disrupting factors such as geopolitical tensions, such as instability, crisis associated to climate change, energy, etc. But on the other hand, we are also seeing, the population growth, a change in tastes and preferences, etc. So all of these different factors help, frame what the consumption and what the production of food and foodstuff in 2040 will look like. We're very concerned about the possible problems that we might have in net importing countries, such as many of those in the Caribbean. In fact, here in the Caribbean, we find a mixed situation where we have net exporters, Guyana and Suriname, and we have net importers, such as the islands. So in this particular part of the world, it is complex to find a balance between the two different aspects. But we should be able to find some of the most important ideas regarding trade policy, trade infrastructure, etc. And those good ideas will transpire over the course of these discussions. I'm sure about that. We are of the belief that trade policy can help in the different aspects of food insecurity. We believe that, in terms of availability, trade is a determinant of what is being produced and what is the productivity levels in given countries, given that the pressure from imports and the opportunity of exports may determine local productivity. So trade has a lot to do in this dimension of availability. Regarding access, also trade could be a very powerful component because it might help increase the income in rural parts of the different countries. So we believe that by facilitating trade, we may have more access. The third dimension of food insecurity, which is utilization, has to deal with the nutritional value of what we consume in a given country. And again, trade can help, by means of a good trade policy, help out define a good profile of imports which are nutritional in nature. And finally, stabilization, the fourth dimension of food security, which has to do with the reduction of variations and vulnerabilities in terms of availability and access. So there are so many points of view. There are so many dimensions related to trade policy and food insecurity and how we can help with mitigating the risks associated by means of promoting some global supply chains, facilitating trade, promoting good negotiations, promoting regional harmonization of standards, mutual recognition. There are so many different dimensions that we can discuss in order to think about how can we better support issues related to the reduction of food insecurity in our regions. So I'm going to start by passing the floor to Mr. Anton Edmonds from the IDB to see how the IDB is looking at these problems right now. Anton, please. There's a presentation here. I'm going to send it. I'm going to facilitate you my computer so you can pass it on.
So I must admit that Jaime just covered the first two of my slides. So I think the intention is to make the session shorter.
Let me put it here in presentation mode.
Thank you. So look, as Jaime already pointed out, I think when we think about food security, we just purely think about the availability of food. But we're in this region, well, in all markets, it's not just the availability of food, it's nutritious food. The other part of the equation is we make assumptions that because food is coming in or food is being grown, that everybody has access to it. And that's not the truth. We've done a series of household surveys in Suriname. I think there's one being undertaken here in Barbados, and there's one that we supported in the case of Jamaica. And what we're finding is that food poverty, is a serious issue. So what we're finding is that as you go out of the central locations, that in many instances you're seeing the impact of a lack of access to food impacting kids, and of course that you end up with that cycle of kids not eating properly, kids basically struggling in terms of school, and then we end up having conceivably social outputs or negative social outputs of it. So it's a significant issue which cannot be sort of just downplayed as it relates to just food stuff coming in and trade. It's access to food. So it's a key element that we have to work on. And of course, during the pandemic, I think that's when it hit home to everybody in terms of the lack of access to traditional markets and the cost. And I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I live between Washington and Jamaica, and the price of food has not come down in Jamaica. So the price has gone up, and it's basically has stayed up. And then you factor into all of this, of course, climate change and the impacts of it. So we see it here. The Prime Minister mentioned it last week when we were here about how brown the country is, and you see it in Jamaica and you see it throughout the Caribbean in terms of the impacts of climate, in terms of yield, in terms of the availability of foodstuff to people. Serious issue, but very, very complex. So at the end of the day, we're here really to focus on the issue of trade and its impact. And I think when we look at the issue of trade and trade's impact on food and accessibility, we need to look at two sides of it. Of course, you can only trade something that's produced. So one key component of the food security issue, especially when we look within the region, we hear a lot of talk about the bread baskets of the region, the Guyanas and the Belizes of the world, and we're going to focus a fair amount on moving goods back and forth. But one of the key elements that we do have to focus on is production and productivity. We do have to focus on utilizing new technologies to address the impacts of climate change, to address the issues of maybe more yield. So, food security and transportation, we have that link, but the production side of the equation is one that we all have to work on, and the bank is very much focused on looking at best practices in terms of technologies that could be deployed. We have here a reference of increased income in rural areas. It was interesting to me in Jamaica, once again, recently, going down to the market and understanding, first and foremost, 5 out of 7 people who work in the markets, in the central markets, are women. And all of the food that's coming into Kingston at the end of the day, and people are coming in from nearby areas to buy food, basically to sort of bring out into the near areas. So when we talk about rural areas, it's interesting because you have rural communities producing, in many instances, bringing foodstuff into the marketplace. And one element as it relates to income here is really and truly how people get paid. Yes, it's about providing services, or governments at times, maybe there are interventions that governments can provide to address obviously people getting paid more money, but interventions that governments can also provide. But there's also an element of a digital agenda that we also have to embrace as it relates to food security, to make sure that farmers are getting money and people are getting access to the resources, the capital that they need to go out there and buy the food stuff that ends up at the marketplace. Nutrition, I mentioned before, we are a region which we have very high incidences of obesity, high incidences of diabetes. So this circular impact it's hurting. So one of the questions that we have to figure out, we as development agencies and governments have to figure out is, what is the nexus here? I mean, there's a cost at the tail end of it if we don't ensure that there's nutritious food stuff being provided. And that's a societal change. I mean, there are elements of it. So once again, it's not just about food coming to the market. It's about the quality of food and making sure that people are embracing the quality of food. So growing up in St. Lucia, running around in the bush, eating yam and plantain and all this kind of stuff, then going to Washington, I can't lie, and then eating McDonald's every chance that I can get. I'm not a good example of how to eat nutritiously. So take a good look at me and do better, all right? But there's a nexus there that we do have to focus some attention on. And at the end of the day, the one element that was focused on was the issue of volatility in terms of availability and access. So yes, we have a tendency, and it's true. We look at the trading routes or the traditional trading routes from north to south, and we do have to start to look more seriously at the interregional opportunities that exist. And there has been talk at the political level in terms of Prime Minister Motley, President Ali, and others about trading intra-regionally, and I think that's a good thing. We do need to dig a little bit deeper to make sure that we can move these goods and there's efficiency in our systems to effectively move these goods so that there's a little bit of protection. And when I say protection, I'm not talking about protectionism of the marketplace, but protection so that there's a wide variety of options that we have or traders have to source product. It was quite interesting to me in Jamaica to find a firm, a Diraman, that IDB Invest was doing some work with, that basically is bringing in stuff from Guyana. It's totally under the radar. And we're putting about $4 or $5 million into them to improve speed to market, some internal items to basically put solar. But there's already some trade going on, and one of the things that I think, we at the bank are going to be focused on is really and truly exploring and exploiting these opportunities that exist to balance out the trade flows. As it relates to the movement of goods and services, this is an age-old issue. I mentioned it yesterday that earlier in my career, talking about the need to use technologies, and 20 years, maybe 30 years later in my career, coming to the same conclusion that the implementation of technologies in our ports and airports, that we're really lagging behind. And I get it. I've worked for governments before, so I get it. It's expensive. But we really have to bite the bullet and make that investment, and we as financial institutions have to be supportive of it. The idea that containers can come in and they can be pre-cleared and food stuff can be moved to refrigerated locations and saved, and all of this kind of stuff are things that we need to sort of work very closely with governments on. And it's no longer a system, at least in my view, it's no longer a system where we are now just lending a government, or we should be lending a government money to build a pier. It should be, okay, you want to borrow money to build a pier. Okay, what are you going to use that pier for? Do you have the systems in place to support that pier so that it is efficiently and effectively being used? The issue of supply chain resilience, we're in a hurricane zone. I mean, I think we all know that. We've lived it. So there is this harsh reality that we have to build a hardened infrastructure, soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure. So when I say soft, the technology part of it, the redundancy of the technologies that we use. And there has to be a certain amount of portability of it so that we're, at least amongst ourselves within the region, there's a certain standardization that's going on. I'm not suggesting that every country needs to follow every single other country, but I have to believe, if we believe, and I do believe, I'm old enough, been around long enough, I still believe there's an opportunity in this Caribbean for us to integrate. And I still believe that maybe it's through mechanisms like this, little mechanisms like this. I know we talk about the free movement of people, but geez, if we can move some goods a little more effectively and efficiently, then that could be a very good first step for us to build upon. So ultimately what we're looking at is we do need a strong public sector at the core of it. Governments, we talk about digitalization of governments and services of governments. So we need the public sector to buy in, to be part of it, the civil servants to really and truly, they're the front line. They're the ones, the customs agents, the finance directors, everybody else who's managing the budgets of the countries. They need to understand how efficiency can maybe bring money in more rapidly into the coffers of the government, more efficiently, so that money can then be spread out, schools and everything else that we focus on. We need civil society's active engagement in this because, as we well know, it's civil society who, I mean, it's all of us, but it's really civil society that mobilizes to light a little bit of a fire under governments at times. And so getting civil society involved in the dialogue is important because that can really move things along. And the big bad private sector, you know, look, I said yesterday, governments don't trade. I mean, governments, we have ministries of trade, but it's industry and it's people who trade. So the private sector has a role to play in this equation, and in many respects, part of what we often try to do is make sure the private sector is part of the equation and is not on the side and then becomes an impediment to the kind of policies that we need to implement. And ultimately, it's us, right, the development partners. So it's the IDB, it's the World Bank, it's all of us getting our act together and really and truly trying to lay out a singular page as it relates to work from a singular page as it relates to trade facilitation and the efficient movement of goods, of cargo, and of people. So I'm going to close with this. I mean, we have, and I have to, it's obligatory because I have Jaime here, so he's going to report back if I don't give the spiel for this new initiative that we've launched within my division or within the bank, which is One Caribbean. Focus on a variety of areas, focus on citizen security, of course, climate resilience, really trying to get the private sector or the SMEs, private sector, create the enabling environment. But one key component of this is really the issue of food security. And we believe at the bank that this is an opportunity for us to test ourselves, to make sure that those involved in trade and integration and others and in agriculture, that we're all aligned and we're all working together. And then the other part of the equation is to test governments. Because this creation of One Caribbean was really the result of governments, including our governor, Prime Minister Motley, basically stating that they want us to focus on small island developing states. So this is going to be a test for us institutionally to figure out how we work together, division by division, on the issue of food security. But it's also going to be a test to governments to basically say, okay, you've talked about integration, you've talked about implementing like systems. We're going to give you we're going to put the resources in towards doing it. And, I say I'm not going to be afraid. I'm sure I will be afraid, but I'll be forced to speak up to the board and to others and say we failed and why we failed. So we have an opportunity here to test the theory that we can take a real solid run at the issue of food security and wrap that into a box as it relates to trade facilitation and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anton. Very, very interesting. Now let me pass the floor to Professor Ramirez here. I'm going to prepare here her presentation.
Thank you very much, Jaime. I would like to start by, of course, thanking the invitation that the IDB kindly did. I actually have it here, so it's fine. Thank you very much to Jaime and to Krista Lucenti, who is here, who did an excellent job by forcing me to work on something that I find it extremely interesting and extremely relevant. I mean, after seeing, I'm joking when I say force, but this is tremendously important by the numbers that I'm going to present. What I think is just an idea and a proposal of a strategy on how to make affordable, secure, and securing healthy diets through the trade policy tools, right? So the strategy is about using 5 main issues. So first of all, identify healthy foods and supply chains, then examine the market access tools available, then to revise existing trade remedy measures and limit its application of new ones for nutritious food. foods, then to use regulatory measures to create consciousness and to express also, that the countries get to express at the different committees of agriculture, either at the WTO or at respective regional forests. So I'm gonna say the numbers that I just said that they struck me when I read this study. That it was made by scholars of the Tufts University and also of FAO, where they actually identified that over 3 million people are unable to afford sufficient nutritious food for an active and healthy life. Also that 55% of retail items had some active imports supplementing domestic production, and those around 48 have non-zero tariffs whose average effective rate is around 6.7 of the imported commodity price. And also that the highest restrictions are on nutrition-rich vegetables, fruits, and animal source foods. Also that the average over all foods that are imported, the 83% of the retail price is domestic value added after the arrival. That TVT and SPS measures combined can raise the import prices of agricultural products by almost 15%. And this is only TVT and SPS measures, and we know that there are many other measures that are applied after the arrival of the goods. And then also that the share of consumer prices for least cost retail items are attributable to tariff and NTMs, averages between the 0.5% and 2.1% respectively. So these are the numbers that motivated us, because as I said before, I was encouraged to actually make a research on, on what is it needed and how can trade help to actually make affordable the diets, right, and healthy diets. So particularly because it has been proved that healthy diets are extremely expensive. So where are the main obstacles? So first of all, it's important that countries identify these healthy foods products, that they basically are, of course, belong to the agricultural products, either that they could be perishables, and also its supply chains, and that take us to fruits, vegetables, and animal-based products, but there are also non-perishables and its supply chains as grains and cereals. These are obviously examples. But that can lead to the main obstacles, or to the main commodities that have obstacles and that are more expensive in the markets. Then the market, so let's start, but what are the tools available in trade to make these products more available and cheaper? So first of all, tariffs, right? Reducing or eliminating customs duties. On what? Actually, these scholars identify that, and they promote the importation of bulk products. So also, I think that's also important that by identifying these specific products that we just, this strategy can be implemented, there can be programs to reduce the tariffs on these specific products. Then also, reducing or eliminating all the charges, okay? As this study only focused on tariffs and SPS and TVT measures, but we know there are many others, as I said before, many other charges and many other non-tariff barriers. So let's focus also on identifying, it's important to do an exhaust, but this is a case by case. It needs to be done a case by case, as it was said in the conference before. This is at a national level, to do an exhaustive analysis on which are the other charges, which are the authorities that collect these other charges, and also to establish a policy and a national policy to reduce these other charges. Also implement TF provisions, like trade facilitation provisions, either from the WTO agreement or if they have in a specific free trade agreements, then also implement these policies. And what does it mean? Like, for example, it will limit the food wastage through the TFA just by implementing any agreement or any FTA provisions. That has been also recognized by scholars of the National University of Singapore. And also, it's important to have strategic suppliers of healthy foods to partner with the, if there is a program of authorized economic operators in the country, then to partner that is strategic importers or suppliers, right, of healthy foods. They partner with this program or with the authority that is in charge of implementing this program, and also to simplify, automate work on advanced customs procedures as well. So such as obviously the automated single window evidence, the evidence to provide the evidence of payment of tariffs, the certificates of origin, compliance with sanitary and phytosanitary, the compliance of sanitary and phytosanitary measures and TBT requirements, trade barriers regulations requirements, and also to have this mutual recognition on transportation documents. And then last but not least, to also guarantee the appropriate infrastructure for logistics. Obviously, this is, as it was mentioned before by Anton, that also the IDB plays or can play a very strategic role, as they have been doing it in the region, to provide the appropriate logistics depending on the country. But obviously, we can acknowledge to preserve the cold chain at the border posts, to incentivize transporters with cold infrastructure as well, to use infrastructure for cold chain at the border posts, independent of the nature of the border, and then investing in creating common border posts, well, when it's applicable, right? And then in the next, and then also tariff preference programs, as I mentioned before. Well, traditionally, these have been applied by developed countries to developing countries to benefit, but in this case, perhaps when it comes to rich foods and to nutritious foods, then the developing countries can apply some specific programs on tariffs for those imported goods, right? So for bulk commodities and also for food perishables. Can we go to the next one? So in this case, it's also important to revise if there exist some trade remedy measures and limit its application for new ones for nutritious foods for those that have been identified, either safeguards, anti-dumping duties, or countervailing measures. And then the next one is to also use the sanitary and phytosanitary measures as a balance, of course, that it's not a matter of just withdrawing any type of protection. It's important to use it as a with obviously based on science, but simplify, if possible, eliminate some requirements such as samples, so when possible, obviously, and base SPS measures on international standards, right? Also, the TBT, the trade barriers to trade, also they can help to create and increase the nutritious consciousness of consumers through labels. For example, Mexico has this one that you see and has this label. In every fruit product that you buy in the supermarket, it has these stamps, these black stamps, that says that is high in sugar, sodium, or fat. So, and the type of fat as well that is included, whether it's trans or not. So it does have, it's a matter of balancing these issues and also increase the recognition that they have, that they do, that other countries do to also speed up to certain labels, so to speed up the imports, and also base also the TBT measures on international standards as well, include private standards, the use of private standards, and the rules of origin can be flexibilized when we talk about nutrient-rich foods. And then last but not least, this has been one of the main issues at the GATT or at the WTO at a multilateral level on why countries cannot advance and cannot agree on further obligations. That first of all, at the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, in its Article 12.2a, allows the countries that temporarily restrict or prohibit exports on foodstuffs in order to prevent or relieve critical shortage of those foodstuffs. But however, the Article 12 of the Agreement of Agriculture attempts to balance this equation by addressing the concerns of importing members whose food security might equally be threatened by such measures. So they also, members instituting an export prohibition shall notify the Committee of Agriculture at the WTO, presenting details of its measures. So what is the proposed duration, and then that they have consulted with other countries, and they should consult with other countries if it's requested by certain members. So this has been an issue that obviously with the food price crisis that happened in 2008, but also recently with the COVID-19, so with that crisis as well, that has been raised. This issue has been raised, and there have increased the concerns. So obviously, if countries do not get like a mutual agreed solution on these concerns that are raised, that they have raised with other countries or with the country that imposes this measure, then they have the resource of dispute settlement mechanism. And particularly now at the regional level, they can be used more effectively. So let's don't forget, I think, another important thing, just as concluding remarks, food security and nutrition go hand in hand more than ever. NTBs increase foods, if we see them as a whole, like not only these two measures, 5 times more than tariffs. Reduce NTBs that have a negative effect on food security while finding a balance in regards to country interests is also important. And also it's important to take a look at best practices of other countries. Egypt, the Arab countries, they have started interesting programs, particularly a lot of investment from development banks, because they were food dependent of Russia and Ukraine. So now they have developed like new ways of mobilizing financial resources to small farmers, et cetera, et cetera. They're like Botswana, Fiji, Peru, Tonga. Also, they have national measures to minimize the risk and enhance benefits of increased trade and investment lessons from national and use of fiscal policies. So it marked me a lot, the phrase that the Prime Minister said yesterday, that a hungry man is an angry man. So let's don't forget that, and let's also try to have also nutritious people that are healthy, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramirez. That was a very interesting toolkit of ideas to deal with nutrition outcomes out of trade policy. Now let me pass the floor to Mr. Roble, who is from the FAO, and here is your presentation. I'm going to give you my computer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Krista, for having me here, and to the government of Barbados to organizing this very important forum. So, as FAO, our food security is our mandate, and I will be showing briefly, I will stay within the 10 minutes maximum, some big pictures and some work that we are currently doing in the region with our sub-regional office and with the Caribbean Development Bank. That is one of our main partners in the region. So the big picture is this one, and then Jaime and Anton already mentioned it, that the sustainable goals recognize that the international trade contributes to food security. So the whole aim of these forums and our work is to make this trade sustainable and looking into elimination of hunger and food security and malnutrition. And it's important to understand that we are all interconnected, and measures or events that happen in other countries or other regions affect throughout the world. Trade is really an integral part of the food systems. So as Anton was saying, we produce, we move. So without moving the food that we produce somewhere else, we don't have food security around the world. And regardless, no matter the level of income of the country and their size, every country import or export something. As you can see, from low income, lower income, upper income, and high income countries, we all trade and we are all interconnected in terms of agri-food. If we zoom in our region, there is agri-food going on intra-regionally. So South America, 60%, Central America, 20%, and here the Caribbean, 29%, purchased from regional suppliers. So as Anthony was saying, things are going on. However, this intra-regional trade, the closeness of these countries offers non-exploited opportunities here. And there is a strong, strong potential if we are able to move these goods and facilitate the movement of these goods to trade better and substitute imports from very far away. And we need to continue to work in reducing all these, as Edna was mentioning, this tariff and non-tariff measure and other obstacles to trade. If we zoom a little bit more in the CARICOM countries, more than 60% of the food consumed in CARICOM countries is imported, and half of its member states import even more, 80%. So trade is crucial, vital in this sub-region in the CARICOM countries, and this is why the member state has moved on with this 25 by 25 initiative that really aims to reduce the CARICOM food import bill by 25%. And by reducing import dependency, the aims is as well, again back to Anton, to produce more into the region, which is clearly a must. As Investment Center, we have partnership with CDB, and we are working on the topic, and we worked in 4 pilot countries to look at what was going on in terms of trading, how trades are goods, agri-food goods are moved, and we looked at Guyana, Barbados, Grenada, and Trinidad, and we've seen that the Caribbean has a series of overlapping hub and spoke model of transshipment, and that, for example, Trinidad is playing a big role in serving the OACS region, and Guyana and Suriname. That the linear, so the major companies that are moving the goods around the world and in the region, the numbers of independent shrink to 3, so there is some concentration, and that the informal shipping network, what is called in the region the schooners, are really an important but understudied component of the food security and the movement of goods between the different islands and countries. And that some of these countries, the 4 countries that we studied, have a serial import dependency of 100%. So you can imagine how important it is to be able to move goods. And then when we looked at the literature review, that the NTBs would lead to an 18% increase in intra-CARICOM within 5 years, and this was a study done in 2017. Of course, we talk about trade at large, not only agri-food, but it's so important that the non-tariff barriers are looked at in and removed. If we look at what is going on in these 4 countries, things are moving. So agri-food is moved, is produced, and is traded. And of course, Guyana is the main supplier of the sub-region, and we hope more so into the future with all the investment that are going on. And Trinidad, for the size of its economy, is the one as well re-exporting a lot of processed food. Going to the conclusion of our work that I hope will feed some of the discussion now, that new investments are needed, but both in physical and digital infrastructure. That we have opportunities, for example, the CARICOM wharves that are special docks in the ports that have, specialized way of moving goods without all the issue, but are reserved to smaller boats. That we need some cold chain and inland logistics and consolidation centers. When we spoke with people that move goods, they say that it's very difficult to have the critical mass. But sometimes the critical mass cannot be reached, so it's important to be creative in what they call the less than container load. So how can we have these containers that are not full, but are correctly priced and insured as well? This is a huge problem because some of the islands are small, but we need as well to deliver goods to them in a way or another. And digital portals that are able to match supply and demand. Why? Talking with importers here in Barbados for the tourism industry, they say, yes, we would love to import more from Guyana, but we don't know what they are producing. So it would be very important to have this kind of portals. And I will not repeat the importance of non-tariff barriers because we know. And looking really into the Treaty of Chaguaramas that gives a lot of opportunities for CARICOM countries, and things are already in place, but if we pull it at scale, we can really make a difference. And what to do next, the NTM, the proposal on trade facilitation, and policies for implementation. But if I can give you one example that we are working on it at FAO, and you mentioned the Arab states that are really going to it, is the ePhyto, which is it replaced the paper-based certification. It can help in increase competitiveness and could really enable Caribbean exporters to meet international standards. Market access, you really pre-check what you're going to export, and you really expedite what you're doing, and you really mitigate your risk in terms of pest and disease, because if we look at agri-food trade and we move as well, unfortunately, sometimes pests, so it's important, and you avoid rejection. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raul. Very interesting presentation. You can keep the computer over there. I don't need it here for the next upcoming minutes. And I'm going to ask a round of questions to the panelists here. Only one, because we may have time limitations. I'm going to start with you, Raul.
Okay.
Since you were the last to present. And it has to do with the fact that, yes, we all recognize that we need to reduce logistic costs in the Caribbean for food and for everything else, but particularly for food. So the question relates as to how can nations in the Caribbean leverage regional cooperation and partnerships to enhance trade facilitation and streamlining cross-border logistic processes. So what can you tell us about that, particularly in the food sector?
Yes. No, thank you. Again, I don't want to repeat what I've said, but the non-tariff barrier is really key. We have the instrument to do it, and the government are very serious about it. Being creative, as I said, and but as well looking into sometimes the ports, for example, are open 24 hours, 7/7, but customs are not. So you have goods coming in, arriving on Thursday, for example, this Thursday, but we have the Whit Monday here. So goods arrive on Thursday and they will be cleared a week after. So this kind of solution can really help, having harmonization of ports, pest and disease control, and customs aligned. This would really help in expedite goods. So again, there is the big picture, but as well there are some action that can be really done now that can really help in moving goods in a quicker way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raul. Now, one question for Professor Ramirez. You've been following the multilateral negotiations, the WTO negotiations, I know for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you a question related to that aspect of our work. And it has to do with the fact that there's ongoing work at the WTO level on the agricultural sector. So would you please update us a little bit, and particularly as to how can that help, to mitigate risk of food insecurity globally?
Yes, thank you very much. I have to clarify that now that Jaime calls me professor, it's funny because he was my professor in Georgetown. So I'm truly honored to share a panel with him. Basically, in summary, they didn't succeed on providing they didn't deliver any result. The members discussed an issue, an important issue that was, they divided the negotiations in three main aspects. But the one that has been, they found a common text in February, and they discussed on a draft text that's always like a big achievement, let's put it this way. However, despite that they had the text, the negotiations, they weren't able to reach consensus, and they didn't even reach a work plan. And the remaining issue that divided was the public stock holding for food security purposes and other matters, such as the negotiation timelines, expected outcomes, and the scope of the flexibility to be provided to food imports by the most vulnerable countries. So still, the main issue is related, despite that in 2020 they agreed on a declaration on food security, then these declarations are a big intention. They do have intention programs, but to give them the content, they haven't been able at the end. The latest news is that they haven't been able, and this has been the main issue that stopped them for agreeing or finding consensus.
Thank you very much. Yes, the agricultural issues are some of those that determine very often regional outcomes. So it's important to make progress at the multilateral level so as to move forward at the regional and sub-regional level. Thank you very much. Now, a question for you, Anton. We've seen here that there's, this policy here in the Caribbean, 25 by 2025, which means that they're going to curb the importation of foodstuff 25% by year 2025. A challenging outcome, but the countries at the Caribbean level are working, and apparently they have been successful in that regard. My question is about the relationship between this 25 by 2025 policy and the One Caribbean strategy of the IDB. What is that relationship, please?
So look, at the end of the day, we're responsive to member countries. We're responsive to the region. So the region basically set a target, and the region is the one who basically stated that that there's a need for more interventions, directed interventions in the food security area. So it's not a top-down Washington as, once again, I need to bite my tongue with my colleagues here, but it's not a top-down approach that we're taking here. We didn't design this in Washington, D.C., and it's still not fully designed. This was basically in response to a directive from the governors to focus on this particular issue based on a CARICOM mandate and a mandate of governments. So what we have is we have an opportunity to be responsive. And once again, we have an opportunity to test all of us, but really and truly test the governments. So let me be clear. I think we've all read in the news recently about some goods coming from Guyana but not being able to enter Trinidad and Tobago, right? So Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Barbados, 3 countries talking about ferry service and the movement of goods and everything else. Yet we still have a problem with goods being able to move. This is the kind of stuff that I believe that we, as the bank and One Caribbean, that we have the ability to put some resources and challenge the system that currently exists. And really and truly test whether our commitments being made, our leadership's commitments are indeed true, and also to identify what some of the real gaps continue to be. There is protectionism in the market. There is the issue of standards and maybe some uncertainty as to standards. So this is the opportunity to ground truth to that, to take some of the best practices. We're involved, for example, I know we're involved in Guyana in building a lab to deal with SPS phytosanitary measures. I would like to believe that if we were going to be involved in an operation similar in Barbados, that we would align it with what's going on in Guyana, so that at the end of the day, we're not building two systems which don't necessarily communicate with each other and are not operationalized. So One Caribbean at the end of the day is, once again, this effort to be responsive to the governments and to their stated needs, but also to really and truly test to see how far we're going to be able to go. Within a short period of time, within 4 years, we basically have to see whether we can help, working with the FAO, working with everybody else, whether we can help move the needle. And I think we can. I have every confidence that we're going to make some instrumental changes. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anton. So this brings me to the end of this panel. I want to summarize it in 30 seconds in 3 main ideas. The fact that we realize that trade policy and trade responses are absolutely important in the mitigation of food insecurity risk by addressing non-tariff measures, by addressing trade facilitation related issues such as ports here in the Caribbean, by undertaking harmonization processes of regulatory measures, etc. The second big idea is that multilateral outcomes are important. We saw that there's a full toolkit at the WTO and in regional agreements that are important and that should be, improved. They need to be addressed. The WTO has to be more effective if we want to have also effective sub-regional positive outcomes in terms of food trade and food security. And the third one and final is that, yes, there is a very important role for donors and IFIs in the leveraging of responses in order to mitigate those risks. I think that those are the 3 big ideas that we have here, and I want to thank you again, Anton, Edna, and Roble for your support, and thank you for your attention today. Thank you very much.